Arizona Cardinals going through what y'all need to know to make some money on this team in 2021. So last year, 8-8 record, pretty representative of the team as a whole, I would say. But this is about next year. That's what's important. So my betting record for them, 9-2 on strong bets. That's about where I want it to be for most teams and where it is for most teams. Not perfect, but we'll get there. Bets, obviously, and that's kind of the overall stuff. Not so good, 14-14. And what happened there is I was pretty consistently a little bit off on over-unders because I was pretty slow to recognize the strengths and weaknesses of this defense, I would say. Still not too bad overall. You're still making money. But, yeah, let's get into their offseason. Losses for this team. You lose two linemen who started games last year, right? Mason Cole, J.R. Sweezy. J.R. Sweezy started almost all the games outside of a few he was hurt for. Their losses, not a big deal. You're not talking about positive players in either sense in this case. You trade Mason Cole for basically nothing, and J.R. Sweezy, I believe, retired. Neither guy, like I said, you're going to miss. Now, we'll talk about the replacements later, but those two things, not a huge deal. Dan Arnold, actually a fairly useful player. Now, this team didn't go about utilizing him particularly well, so I don't think this is a big deal, but it is interesting to know that when you do lose a player that's talented, that's never a good thing. Kenny Drake, whatever. He's not a running back who matters. There's only 5-6 of them in the whole NFL. He's fine, but it doesn't matter. And the big one, though, Larry Fitzgerald. And despite his age and his waning usefulness as anything but right by the line of scrimmage receiver, I actually think his loss is fairly significant. We'll talk about that as we get into the offense as a whole. But listen, with him gone, you're losing basically the only player on this team outside of DeAndre Hopkins who consistently understood how to beat defenses. Which is an issue. Defensively, you lose your two starting outside corners, Patrick Peterson, Drake Kirkpatrick. Now, normally I would say it's not really that big of a deal because neither of those players performed particularly well last year. Patrick Peterson still has a little bit in him, and Drake Kirkpatrick does provide, both of them really, they do provide a baseline of NFL caliber corner play, which is important. But neither of them are anything special. Normally, I think it would be fairly replaceable. Problem is, this team was not necessarily in a position to replace that situation. Well, again, we'll talk about that later, but that's not ideal. You lose Angelo Blackson. That's a big one. He goes to the Bears, a team notorious for identifying down lineman talent, and there's a reason they picked him up. He's really good. The Cardinals are going to miss him. Is he a superstar? No, but again, you don't want to see a team lose talented players. Devondre Campbell, not a 2021 linebacker. Hassan Reddick, a player who I roasted a lot if you watched any of my Cardinals videos last year, and with him gone, I mean, you're fine, right? It's more than made up for by the presence of Chandler Jones, who missed most of last year for injury. Now, I will grant, like I said, that Hassan Reddick does provide more as a pure effort and athleticism rusher. Now you're not missing any source of consistent pressure with him. He's just not good at that. But I will say there's maybe a little bit of something to that, although not something I worry about. And then Corey Peters, I believe, still a free agent. We'll see if he comes back. I actually think it'd be good for the Cardinals if he did because they're definitely missing someone in his spot. But is he a player who really matters? Not necessarily. But you do add some stuff here. You sure do, and it's really important. So offensively, the huge one here is Ronnie Hudson. One of the top 10 centers in the NFL, definitely better than that. But, yeah, he's a player who's going to make a huge difference. We'll talk about how once I kind of go through how the offense is going to function going into this year. But definitely a big deal. James Conner, whatever, I like him. Is he running back who matters? No. A.J. Green, A.J. Green has not been particularly good the last 2 years. I don't think, especially by the end of the year last year when he was a little bit healthier, I don't think he was particularly horrible. And if there's a player you're going to bring in to potentially replace what Larry Fitzgerald gave you mentally for what was on the free agent market, I think he's probably up there with your options. Not that I necessarily expect them to get that out of him or to use him like that, but something to notice. And then Brian Winters, who shouldn't even be, he's a horrible. He's one of the worst guards in the NFL. Only reason he's on this list because I guess there's a chance he starts for them, and boy, would that be a disaster. Defensively, so these top two are big, right? Malcolm Butler, Darqueze Dennard, because, again, like I mentioned with the losses, you're adding two players who provide actual NFL corner play. Malcolm Butler is actually pretty good still. So, yeah, definitely good additions there. Darqueze Dennard, he was hurt for a lot of the year with the Falcons last year, but again, when he's on the field, he's actually a pretty useful player. The big one here, not to bury the lead, J.J. Watt, still super elite, going to help them a ton, provides a ton of the things that they were missing, just a big deal overall. And I throw Xavier Williams in here too, more for evenness. I think as of right now, I think he might start at nose tackle for them on early downs. He's okay. He's just a fat guy who doesn't necessarily affect play too much, but won't get you smoked either up the middle. Then we get the draft class. So with rookies, with these videos, until a player plays on an NFL field, I'm not much concerned with how good or bad I think they're going to be. I think having preconceived notions of that just leads you to being wrong later. Although these top two guys are going to factor in, again, once I talk about how this team is going to function, are potentially really important for sure. And you never know with late round rookies. But Zaven Collins, Rondale Moore, the big ones here. So then we're going to get into the position groups and talk about what these teams have at each spot. And we go in into what these teams have and what the Arizona Cardinals have, and each of these players pretty deep here. So stick with me. First, like I said, quarterback, Kyler Murray, most important position on the team. First thing you need to talk about. Now, I have him ranked 14th there out of 70. And you see on these panels on the right, at the top is the total number of quarterbacks that I have listed. I have on my channel the top 20 at each position. I did rank all the players, though. And the number next to their name is where they rank out of that total list. So he's the 14th out of 70 quarterback. Now, that might sound a little low, but some things with Kyler Murray you got to remember, right? First, he's a lot closer to like 7 than he is to 20. So that's something to keep in mind. But also, despite the highlights he started to put up and the production that is afforded to him kind of by the offense and situations been put in, is a quarterback that still has pretty real flaws. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about. So I guess I'll start with the positives. He's super electric as a runner. He's the reason that this team even has a functioning rushing offense. He consistently creates yards like that. He is a player who does one of the most positive things that anybody in the NFL does, and that's he just consistently is willing to put the ball in the air downfield. That leads to tons of positives consistently, whether it's a good decision or not, generally. Now, outside of the like Jameis Winston is basically the only example I can think of where it doesn't consistently lead to positive results, and even then it's okay. So he does that really well. He is not awful at reading defenses. He can function at least a little bit like that. He can get rid of the ball quickly. So you do have, a pretty positive player for sure. But I do want to talk about his weaknesses, because that's where, when you're looking to, match this team up and looking at weaknesses you can exploit when you're betting on this team, that's something you got to look at. And he still has some real ones. He's still really, really turnover prone. Not just the fumbles, too. He consistently misses defenders, puts the ball into dangerous areas, and not just when he throws it deep. Actually, I think it's even worse when he tries to play, game manager type quarterback. And as far as, picking quickly where he's going to throw, I think he makes a lot of mistakes. He ends up throwing the ball to a lot of defenders, whether it gets batted down or anything like that. He still has a super unique quirk where, despite being one of, if not the best touch throwers in the entire NFL, I mean, the types of throws he's capable of making like that outside of Russell Wilson are nuts. He still chooses not to do that consistently. He, for some reason, especially the closer you get to the line of scrimmage, opts into these everything he has, hard as he can, bullet passes. And frankly, he's just bad at them. He goes from, like I said, a pretty accurate touch quarterback who can fit the ball into a lot of interesting spots that provide good value, to a guy who's throwing the ball way too high, out of his receiver's range of catching, who ends up, like I said, because of that, putting the ball in really dangerous spots, because that's how you get tips over the middle. That's how you get stuff batted down at the line of scrimmage. And that's how you just miss throws. And that's something that's still definitely a concern. It's something that I thought he would have got better about last year, but never really did. And that's something that's definitely still a concern for him. So, yeah, like I said, you have a positive player overall, but, we'll see. Then backups, Colt McCoy. Colt McCoy's fine. He's definitely okay. You saw last year when he played for the Giants, he can at least function. Well, I do have real concerns about this offense specifically if he were to come in, because this offense effectively relies on Kyler Murray doing things outside of its structure, because, again, this offensive infrastructure, as I'm going to talk about later, is just horrible. But Colt McCoy doesn't do that stuff. So then you have a quarterback who's leaning into these really inefficient, consistently bad, like bubble screens and short passes that aren't designed well. And that's going to lead to some really, really negative results. Now, is that Colt McCoy's fault? Necessarily. I don't think there's a lot of quarterbacks that could function very well here, but that is something to keep in mind. And Chris Trevler, not Christ Trevler, Chris Trevler, he's just a rushing quarterback. Really, he's just a meme, actually. He doesn't even have any NFL throws, basically. So I'm not going to talk about him too much. Then we move on to running backs. And despite a lack of real stars at this position, you're fine. Like I said before, there's only really like 6, 7 around there running backs who even matter at all in the NFL. And what I define that as, by the way, is for you to really matter and separate yourself from the pack as running back, you have to consistently be turning drives and possessions into touchdowns. I think that's where running backs can actually add value. There are some other things that are definitely useful that guys have, but I think that's where you really get into guys who matter at any level. So with the Cardinals, they don't have that, but they have 2 guys that are okay. Chase Edmonds, James Conner. I do actually think, as far as like the traditional thunder and lightning type stuff goes, fitting that pretty well. Now, is that a really useful thing? No. But in Chase Edmonds, you have a guy who does fairly consistently create missed tackles, is pretty fast, and is going to be just fine. If this is fantasy production we're talking about, he'd be a lot higher than this. This isn't. This is just on the field because he is still exceedingly weak at contact. He doesn't he doesn't notably create yards in tight spaces. It's just, if you get him way out in space, which is a useful thing for sure. I have him listed as a starting running back, and the difference between whatever the 15th guy and the 30th guy is not large. And then James Conner, he actually does a lot of stuff. He's just not fast enough to matter in the end. But he is fine. Past that, though, you have basically nothing. You have Eno Benjamin. A lot of people are excited about as a 7th round rookie last year, did not play a single snap. So who knows? Jonathan Ward is ranked there because I think he's played maybe 4 offensive snaps. Maybe I should just had him not ranked like the other guys. But no one I care about outside of those top 3. Again, you should be fine there, but hard to say. And at the wide receiver position, the Cardinals are in, to put it nicely, a unique spot here. Not something I'm very excited about. I'm going to hold off again until we talk about the offense as a whole as to why I think it actually ends up being better than what this screen kind of displays for them. But as far as the individual players go, right, you have DeAndre Hopkins, one of the best receivers in the NFL for sure. I don't think I just to get this out of the way, I've talked about this before. DeAndre Hopkins, I don't think he's particularly close to 1 or 2 or 3. He doesn't do enough of the consistently quickly winning off the line of scrimmage and providing options like that to be at the super elite tier. But don't get it twisted. He's exceedingly useful as an offensive player. He's going to constantly be option anywhere past 5 yards on the line of scrimmage. He does stuff after the catch. Whatever. People know DeAndre Hopkins is really good. Past him, though, boy, does it get rough. So you get A.J. Green, who, like I said, I think mentally has a chance to fill what Larry Fitzgerald did last year, which is important for this team as far as a player who can sit near the line of scrimmage and zone defenses and understand how to adjust his routes to be open and provide an option for Kyler Murray with some level of consistency. My problem is I don't know if they're going to use him like that. I think they might stick him outside and ask him to win one-on-one like that. And while he's still going to do it from time to time, he's still good enough to do that. That really limits not just his usefulness, but I think the usefulness of the offense overall, because past him, it is rough. You get Christian Kirk and Andy Isabella, 2 players who at this point are not really positives. Now, they do have the one unique trait of being really, really, really fast, which provides positives on its own no matter what you're doing. And that's something to keep in mind, like I said, with these rankings, is that despite me thinking very little, Christian Kirk is an actual NFL receiver. The dude is fast enough to matter anytime he's on the field. Andy Isabella, he's really the same thing, except for he at least has a chance to still be kind of good, as opposed to I'm comfortable writing Christian Kirk off as an actual technical NFL receiver. So, yeah. And by the way, my problem with him is he cannot track the ball to save his life unless he's wide open. He cannot deal with any level of physicality unless he was going to be open by the route concept anyway. The likelihood of him actually creating separation is very, very, very low. He's horrible after the catch. Andy Isabella is just not shown enough outside of being just fast for me to say anything besides that, although I do think he at least pretty clearly tracks the ball better. But whatever. Rondale Moore. So that's why when I mentioned rookies, why I think he's so important is because he has a chance, right? Because with these little slot receivers, because that's what Rondale Moore is, he's just a little slot receiver. They generally fit into two categories when they get in the NFL, right? They fit into this category of little guys who use their shiftiness and agility to consistently create space fairly quickly. You think of guys like Jameson Crowder, Adam Humphries, that type of receiver. Or they're these like gadget players who are speed only, didn't learn a lot about understanding defenses, and aren't super useful outside of, whatever jet sweeps. That's more like a Christian Kirk on this own team, on this team, or like a Mecole Hardman would be another example. And which category he fits in is really important. Now, I think he's going to be useful either way, at least to a point, because both of those position types generally are. But if he can fit in that first one, that is a game changer for this offense. That would be huge, huge, huge for them, because then that alleviates the problem I talked about earlier. Now, he's a rookie. I have no clue what he's going to be like, but that's something to keep in mind. Then you have Keyshawn Johnson. I don't hate Keyshawn Johnson. My problem, he just doesn't do anything. He's just an outside receiver who doesn't win. So then, Rico Gafford, Isaac Whitney, I believe both actually played snaps in the NFL before. Well, I know they have. They're whatever. I'm not excited for them to be on the field. I think you'd be in trouble if that's the case as far as any long-term situation. Although Rico Gafford, I will maybe have ranked a little bit low. He at least shows some agility. But, so really you have DeAndre Hopkins. Maybe you have A.J. Green. And you got real issues. Then we move on to the tight end position. And this is the same thing, but you don't even have the high end, right? You have Maxx Williams and Darrell Daniels, the only guys who played any meaningful snaps. I think Ross Travis played for a couple of years ago, actually. But Maxx Williams is effectively just a mediocre, okay blocker who offers no more than, whatever gigantic middle class of tight ends do as far as just running up the seam fairly slowly as a receiver, which is not encouraging. Darrell Daniels arguably could be ranked higher than him. I actually like him quite a bit as a blocker. Problem is, in this offense, they don't really ask him to do the right things and take advantage of that skill set. And as a receiver, he has 3 routes run in his career. So I don't – I mean, it's a couple more than that, but that's not something I'm super excited about. Now, is this team going to use the tight end most of the time on the field? No, so it's not a huge deal as it would be on maybe some other teams, but it's not good. You never want to have a bad position group, right? Just because you can write it down and we're not going to use them much. That's still not particularly useful. Then we get to the offensive line. And this offensive line it's not great, right? But it's actually in a situation because of the offense they play in where they're going to be okay. Now, they're not going to be game changers as far as winning the team games, but they're not going to lose them games, and that is definitely an important thing as long as they stay healthy. A theme with the Cardinals, if you haven't caught on yet, is this is a exceedingly thin team at the top. They are just a few injuries away from having some real bad or real questionable players come in. So that's something to keep in mind. But at tackle, you got DJ Humphries, Kelvin Beachum returning. You're chilling there for sure. Kelvin Beachum, if he's 53rd, but you got to remember that's a starter as far as tackles go. There's 60 starters, and I actually am comfortable with Kelvin Beachum out there. Where this team is really going to struggle is with elite edge rushers. Now, obviously that applies to every team, but this team more so, I think, because they don't at least – DJ Humphries, I think, is actually really good in a lot of scenarios where he's not playing the best of the best. He can rival some elite tackles as far as shutting guys down, but he is a cutoff where he starts to play the real good edge rushers. He can kind of get smoked sometimes. And Kelvin Beachum actually fairly similar, just a worse version. The other starters at guard, you got Justin Pugh coming back, and probably Justin Murray, who started quite a few games last year and the year before he played as well. With them, you're going to be okay. Justin Pugh is fine, especially the way that this team plays offense, where it's not asking him to exercise his lack of strength and kind of get shown up, where it lets him, be the little finesse guy that he is, and that functions. Justin Murray, a player who I actually kind of like, but if anyone is the weak spot here, it's definitely him. He can function okay as a run blocker, and in short spurts, I actually thought he was okay as far as a pass blocker. But over the course of a full season, I'm definitely worried. He started to show cracks as he played more and more snaps last year, and he's in division and plays a schedule with some pretty decent interior rushers. And I'm definitely worried if I'm the Cardinals about Justin Murray kind of becoming a sieve as the season goes on, especially because depth-wise, boy, there ain't nothing here. Again, Brian Winters is absolutely horrible. If they play him, something's gone catastrophically wrong, and they're going to suffer for it. They have no one else effectively who's played any good snaps. Shaq Calhoun played a couple, and he's, as you can see, just as bad. And Max Garcia has only ever played as a sixth extra lineman. And same at tackle, really. Josh Jones, a lot of people are excited about him as a potential first rounder last year. Ended up falling to the third round, and also only played as an extra blocker last year. And who knows? Maybe he's a lot better than this. This is just based on, again, his run blocking as a end of line of scrimmage tight end. So whatever, but not a lot of depth there. And then at center, that's the encouraging one. Ronnie Hudson's really good for sure, especially as a pass blocker. And this was kind of where I want to talk about the difference between him, what they had before, because you go from Mason Cole and Lamont Gaillard, who you see down there, as the backup, who are both really bad and, more interestingly, probably really, really weak. Both of them would get slammed way back into the pocket almost every snap. And that created really unique situations that played on Kyler Murray's flaws. And that's why I was talking earlier about how where I think Kyler Murray still has issues. In this offense specifically, I think there's a chance that he looks a whole lot better than maybe he even is at this point, which we'll talk about now. So this is all the players that I think have any level of relevancy potentially, without whatever significant injuries at different positions. And production-wise, this offense is still going to be good. I can pretty much guarantee you that. Where I get worried is the usefulness of that production, because not all production is created the same, right? The most useful offenses universally, unless you're so good at the quick stuff like the Chiefs are teams that can consistently win up and down the field and are going to put up points and yards and time of possession and win your team football games. This team does not have that. They're still, again, held back by Cliff Kingsbury and the offensive scheme. And this, I keep mentioning that, so I'm going to explain it more now that we're kind of looking at the offense as a whole. The problem is, right, is as opposed to teams that have taken a lot from the college game and these spread concepts like the 49ers and Rams in the same division and used them really well in the NFL, the Cardinals have taken all the bad stuff from college and leaned super heavily on that in the NFL. It's like they're mimicking, but they're not understanding why the other stuff is successful, right? They run infinite numbers of bad bubble screens just because of theoretical numbers advantages, which don't work the same way in the NFL level because everybody's just so much better and faster and there's less space with the narrower hash marks. They try to run the ball with these weird draw scenarios out of bad times and down distances, like second and long even, and they don't lean into creating opportunities off of play action the same way that those other teams do, which is a function of them not being able to run the ball nearly as well as those teams, right? Because they're not using these like spread zone concepts. They're using these weird, like I said, kind of trying to lead NFL defenders way more wrong than is generally possible. Which basically isn't the greatest way to explain it, but that's my huge problem with this team. And that is still the case with Cliff Kingsbury as head coach. Now, maybe he switches brains and they get better, but I doubt it. As far as the personnel goes, because you got to remember that personnel is functioning in that system, there's at least some hope. Because one thing that I'm really encouraged about is the Rodney Hudson thing, right? Because you go from, how I mentioned, a pocket that was consistently collapsing straight up the middle, and a quarterback who deals with that in Kyler Murray by running effectively straight sideways most of the time, which leads that's how fumbles happen. That's how these weird scenarios where he's putting the ball into really dangerous positions when he's outside the pocket happen. Now, it does lead to a lot of the positive plays with his legs too, for sure, but I think there's a chance when he's given this much, much stronger pocket this year, if the offensive line is healthy and if Justin Murray can perform at least, to a mediocre level, where he leans way further into his tendency to just chuck the ball down the field really well, and it leads to some really positive results. Because DeAndre Hopkins is going to be really useful for that. AJ Green is still real big and has a chance to be useful for that. And you got Christian Kirk and Isabella Rondale Moore, who, if I know anything, I know they're fast. If you have a guy who's consistently given time to step into his tendencies and put the ball in the air, which he's capable of doing very, very, very well, you're looking at a chance for some really explosive plays on a fairly consistent basis, which hey, that's awesome. And like I said, he still has his legs too if stuff does go wrong. So you have a team that can be really explosive offensively, and that's going to lead to a lot of production. Run game wise, they're still going to be bad. Rodney Hudson doesn't even really help all that much in that scenario. He's better than what they had, but he's not a game changer as far as that goes. They're still going to be bad and then buoyed by Kyler Murray's production, which, you could do worse, I guess, but that's taking away an option as far as their consistent moving the ball goes. And like I said, with the Larry Fitzgerald thing, I've talked about this a few times. Without him, look at this roster, and you really have to ask yourself, on these, 3rd and 3s that or 2nd and 10s where you need some yards, right? How is that happening? Now you're going to have DeAndre Hopkins there helping for sure, but there's no one who's going to consistently present this like immediate open option with real consistency, especially when, with the way teams overload on DeAndre Hopkins. And again, maybe AJ Green has that. I doubt it. Again, I think they're going to put him outside the numbers and ask him to do jump ball stuff, which will work at times, but it's going to limit his effectiveness. And that's really where my issue with this whole offense comes up, is their ball control ability and their ability to consistently win on drives without leaning on huge offensive plays, which no matter how good your team is, even the Chiefs, the Chiefs lean on a lot of consistent stuff too that I think the Cardinals are missing, and you're going to see the difference between them and these other teams pretty quickly. But that's the offense. Now let's get into the defense. And so we start with the defensive line here. And you went from a team last year on the defensive line where you had like 4 or 5 players who were pretty decent and they're going to do a job for you. That was including guys like Angelo Blackman and Corey Peters, who I talked about earlier. You go from that to a team here that's really top heavy and not even in the greatest way, right? So you have J.J. Watt. As far as we talk about the individual players, you have J.J. Watt, who's super elite. He's going to be really good for them. I have no doubt about that. You have Jordan Phillips coming back after missing most of the year last year with injury, who's, I think, still pretty decent. I don't want people to completely forget about him. He is a guy who actually provides a pretty decent level of penetration, both against the pass and against the run. Isn't bad as a run defender. And overall, if he's starting for you, if you have good players around him, you're doing all right. Past those two, though, it goes real downhill real quick. At nose tackle, is Xavier Williams going to start? Like I said, I haven't projected to now, but that's anyone's guess. As far as the camp battle goes, it's not like he's this great player. You have David Perry and Cam Murray. Sorry, that should be Cam Murray, rookie at nose tackle, neither of whom I'm particularly excited about. David Perry hasn't played in a couple of years. You got Lecky Fotu and Rashard Lawrence as far as the D-tackle stuff goes, who were both rookies last year. Neither of whom were particularly impressive. Now, Lecky Fotu did some okay things towards the end of the year, but he's not a player who I'm even really considering might matter, right? Because it takes proactivity to matter, not just not sucking. And frankly, I don't even think he has the not sucking some snap stuff down yet. He can still get washed out of run plays really easily, and he's not exactly a notable pass rusher. And Rashard Lawrence is just like that, but worse. He barely showed anything that was particularly positive. And I think they're probably leaning on those guys a lot as rotation guys, because J.J. Watt and Jordan Phillips, both older players, especially J.J. Watt at this point, that you don't necessarily want him to snap every down or out on the field every down. And then you also have Zach Allen, who's a player I'm not a fan of at all. He very, very infrequently can provide some penetration. But it's not something that has even close to the required consistency for me to be concerned about it if I'm an opposing offense. And it's generally dependent on just playing bad offensive lines, which guess what? He's not unique in being able to beat those. And then maybe, Michael Dogbe is he went back and forth in the practice squad last year despite all the injuries they had on the defensive line for good reason. He just doesn't really offer anything. So overall, you have the high-end J.J. Watt and some Jordan Phillips, but past that, it gets rough pretty quick. Then there are 2 positions that are really important to talk about with the Arizona Cardinals as far as their defense goes. This is the first one. Because one of the 3 or 4 just most catastrophically stupid things that's happened in the offseason has to do with this position. And if you can see by the numbers, maybe you already guessed it. And it's their decision to draft Zaven Collins that I don't hate necessarily, and already declare him as the starter next to Isaiah Simmons over Jordan Hicks. Why? Right? This is a team that's trying to compete next year. And I'm going to start with Jordan Hicks as far as the players on the screen go. Because with Jordan Hicks, you have a clear, good player who will be a positive for whatever team ends up trading for him for nothing as we get closer to the season. All you have to look at is the results of the teams, results the Cardinals get defensively when they play teams who exploit interior linebackers, namely the 49ers. 49ers are the easiest example in the NFL of a team who you can determine a lot of their offensive success based on how good or bad the opposing middle linebacker is. And the Arizona Cardinals have consistently played the 49ers close the last 2 years since the 49ers became this really good team. So that's the production-based stuff. Then just when you watch him, I mean, you have a player who is functional in pass coverage, actually has decent range, who plays the run not amazingly, but is more than good enough for your team to not get smoked. And for them to already declare him as a backup is just bad. It's just bad. So then we'll get to the starters and why he's so much better than them. Zaven Collins is a rookie. I don't want to make any declaration about how good or bad he is. And actually a huge, huge amount of how good this team can be depends on how well he performs as a rookie, which that's not super encouraging. Something pretty clear about rookie linebackers, no matter how good they end up being at this point, is they don't start off very good. They start off with a lot of mental mistakes, a lot of over pursuit, and a lot of weird things that can get your team beat pretty quick. Just look at even players who have ended up being good. A player like Roquan Smith, Devin White, both linebackers in the top 10 who are pretty good now, or even really good now, but started off with real issues as far as being in the wrong position a lot of time. That's something Zaven Collins is going to have to get over. And then you have Isaiah Simmons, a player who is the same thing, but we have a whole year of him not getting over that. Now, he did definitely get better as the year wore on, and there are some encouraging things about him as a rangy inside linebacker, and I did like him once he started playing there more for sure, as opposed to when he was on the edge at the beginning of the year. But I'm still concerned about him for sure, as far as a full load of snaps, being a keystone defensive player. He showed last year that he's not particularly good in man coverage, which is an issue given what was expected of him being drafted. He showed that as a run defender, while he can make some splash plays, it's not super consistent. And he showed that he's just not outside the one interception, on Russell Wilson, which I think he got undue credit for a lot. Or not undue credit. He did make the play, but he got too much credit for as far as that being where he turned the corner. You just have a player who still makes a lot of mistakes, and I'm definitely concerned about that. And past those three, you ain't really got nothing here. Tanner Vallejo's bad. Ezekiel Turner, Evan Weaver, whatever. A bunch of guys that haven't played. I will mention Jamal Carter down there, actually a player who hasn't played in a couple of years, although when he was on the Falcons, I think there's a chance he could function okay as a linebacker. I doubt it even comes up. But, yeah, it's a big – how good Zaven Collins is really important to them because of the decisions they've made. So then we get to edge, and this is another position that is really, really top-heavy. Now, here at least you got four, but they're in kind of unique circumstances in their own right? Because you get Chandler Jones back from injury, who's still awesome, really, really, really good. DEVON KENNARD, who's also hurt a lot of last year, probably coming back. And keep in mind, there are a lot of good edges in the NFL, so despite KENNARD and Marcus Golden down there being ranked right at the beginning of the 60s, they're both still players I'm more than happy to have on the field most of the time. But they do have some weaknesses. So, yeah, as far as the starters go, with Chandler Jones, DEVON KENNARD, you're going to get production out of them. Chandler Jones especially, obviously, to provide consistent source of pressure. DEVON KENNARD is a really good run defender, actually has some pass rushing chops, especially line with J.J. Watt and Chandler Jones. He's going to be really useful, too. And pass rushing past them goes Marcus Golden. He gets after it. I actually think he ends up being really similar production-wise to Hassan Reddick last year. Not sack numbers, but pressure numbers, because they do the same things. Now it looks different. Hassan Reddick's a lot more athleticism-based. Marcus Golden a lot more with his hands and his motor. But, yeah, and then Dennis Gardeck, who don't let the 85th ranking fool you, is a legitimately useful pass rusher. Now he's exceedingly one-dimensional. All he does is put his head down and run as fast and hard as he can into the tackle and hope that the tackle falls over. Good thing, though, he's strong enough to actually make that happen sometimes. So I do like those four, especially as pass rushing top four. I think you're doing good when you combine them with J.J. Watt, Jordan Phillips, we talked about earlier. Run defending, I get a little bit more concerned. Chandler Jones still pretty good at that. KENNARD is good, but Golden and Gardeck are pass rushers only, really. And the other guys on this list probably should not be playing. Kylie Fitz is really, really, really bad. And maybe, Victor Demukajay is a rookie. Maybe you get something on him. We'll see. But, yeah, again, top heavy with the edge stuff, although I am at least encouraged about this position. But then we get into the other one that's big to talk about with the Arizona Cardinals for the 2021. And that's whatever the hell they're doing at corner. So you had Malcolm Butler and Darqueze Dennard. Like I said, guys I'm a fan of. But here, let me talk about the players individually. So Malcolm Butler, you had a top 20 corner, a guy who's going to be really, really, really positive for this team. A guy who's kind of ready to do it all, can do a lot of things pretty well, and is going to be useful. You bring back Robert Alford, who hasn't played in 2 years and wasn't very good the last time he did play, which is a concern. He's a small off-ball zone corner who doesn't play off-zone coverage particularly well. He's not an idiot. Like he, I think, at least can do a couple things, but he's not somebody I'm even remotely worried about if I'm an offense. You have rookies, Tay Gowan, Marco Wilson, and I think undrafted Lorenzo Burns. They're rookies. We'll see. I'm not super encouraged, but who knows? And then Tay Hayes, he's kind of the one I want to talk about as far as outside corners go. He actually, I think, shown some things as far as, there's a chance he could be the second best corner on this team. Now, it's very limited snaps, but especially when he's on the Dolphins, he's bounced around. I think he was on the Vikings, Dolphins, and Jaguars last year. But on the Dolphins especially, I actually think he showed on a team with a lot of good DBs that he could play and he could function. And I think there's a chance that, again, he should be the other starting outside corner on this team. And in the slot, here's my Byron Murphy slander here. He's just really bad. He's just really bad, and I'm really concerned about this for the Cardinals, right? Because with Byron Murphy, again, you have an undersized player who can't keep up with any level of reasonable receiver in man coverage, doesn't have particularly good zone instincts, despite what people said about him coming out of college, another case why you got to wait with rookies. And he just, he's just not good. Now, he did show some things as far as being more aggressive with the chances he takes last year, which is at least encouraging, right? Because if you're going to be bad, if you're bad in a way that can lead to some turnovers at times, that helps more than just getting burned anyway. But that's not what you want to hear, right? Then you have Darqueze Dennard at slot, who, again, is actually pretty good. He's not going to get burned nearly as much. I don't think they're going to play him nearly as much either, although he really, frankly, should be starting. But it's good depth to have a corner who can function. And then Jace Whitaker is just bad. Very few snaps, though. So, yeah, this corner – here's the main thing with these corners. Now I've talked about them all individually as a whole. Is last year, as a defense, the Cardinals played a lot of man coverage with Patrick Peterson, Dre Kirkpatrick, right? And you're going from that to a group of corners who cannot play man coverage. Malcolm Butler can do okay at it. He's more of an all-around guy, somebody I would feel a lot more comfortable as far as, getting into soft zones or even flat zones and stuff like that. He's pretty good about. But with him, Robert Alford, Byron Murphy, whoever it is, none of those guys I'm even remotely comfortable covering. What are they, if they play the Bears, for example? Who am I throwing on Allen Robinson here? No, it's not. It's not going to happen, and that's a huge deal because in the NFL, their pass rush has to make up for it. And while fully healthy against some bad offensive lines, I actually think they can. That's not a universal concept. And the problem with having let me get to that when I get to the defense as a whole. So last position here, safety. Budda Baker, like I said, I was kind of slow to come around on him actually being pretty good. As a run defender, he's fantastic. He helps a lot against those teams. He can make up for some of the issues I talked about. Linebacker, he makes up for a lot against teams like the 49ers and Rams. He's really good. As a pass defender, he still leaves some to be desired. He can drive on balls really well in the intermediate, but as far as like an in-space, true deep safety, I'm not particularly a big fan of him. And as a man cover player too, I don't think he actually does a particularly good job as far as, erasing tight ends or anything like that. Still useful, super useful overall for sure. And then that other safety spot, this is another case of, I don't know if the Cardinals necessarily prioritize the right things in their personnel that gets in the field, because they've shown that when all these guys are healthy, they're going to start Jalen Thompson. And I don't hate Jalen Thompson. I actually think he's okay. 74th might be a little harsh. I think there's a lot of good safeties in the NFL. But Deontay Thompson is like actively pretty good when he plays for them. Now, he still has some mental mistakes in him, some blown assignments at times, although I don't think it's anything really concerning. And I would argue that when he plays, he's actually really functional. He helps a lot. He actually makes plays. He, even as a run defender, can get his nose in there and do some good things. So I think he should be starting very comfortably, although we'll see, if they do that. And then Charles Washington, the other player at that spot, that kind of other safety, I guess they call Budda Baker their free safeties. Those are strong safety, if you want to call it, whatever. But they're down the field safety. Charles Washington actually showed some decent things as far as the zone instinct guy, although very, very small sample size, so, whatever. And then you got Chris Banjo, Sean Williams, James Wiggins as the other safeties. Chris Banjo played a lot last year. That shouldn't happen again. There's a huge difference between Jalen Thompson 74, Chris Banjo 80. There's a whole lot of tier gap there. Chris Banjo doesn't really function as a coverage player in the NFL, which is an issue. And then Sean Williams, I think, is probably more of a linebacker at this point. I almost prefer him to start a linebacker over like Isaiah Simmons. That's a little harsh, but he got his job yoinked by Von Bell completely last year, despite being a long-time starter for the Bengals. I don't really expect anything out of him. And James Wiggins, just a rookie, I think a 6th rounder, 7th rounder. So overall, as a defense, what can we talk about? And really, like I said, the story is that, well, here, I'll do it this way. So against the run, you're going to be okay, I think, because you do have J.J. Watt, who's a dominant run defender. The other guys aren't like horrible. If Jordan Phillips is healthy, and like Fotu, everyone's like, you're gonna have a good edges with Chandler Jones and Tavon Kennard early downs for sure. And those linebackers, while I'm really concerned about them, I think are at least going to be able to make some splash plays. Although against certain teams, they're going to become a pretty big issue. And Budda Baker helps a lot with that too. In pass defense, though, they're really depending on their pass rush to get home quickly. And I don't think that's really going to happen because J.J. Watt is really good. That's it. There's no but with that. But Chandler Jones, for as good as he is, he doesn't win the same way the other like super elite pass rushers do, like the Bosa brothers, Myles Garrett, whoever you want to throw in there. As far as guys who get to the quarterback like that, Chandler Jones it's more like a ticking clock, right? It's like if you give Chandler Jones 4 seconds, he is going to sack your quarterback. There's nothing you can do about it. But give him 1.5 seconds or whatever, his win rate is going to be a lot lower than these other top guys. And like I said, that creates an issue because I don't trust literally anyone in the secondary outside of Malcolm Butler to even maybe stick with somebody for 4 seconds. And that's going to create a lot of issues. Now, again, this is a situation where maybe them having this unique pairing at inside linebacker, boosts them in that sense, I guess. Maybe they find something in Tay Hayes or one of these rookies or whatever. But as a pass defense, they're really dependent on their pass rush winning really quickly. And if it doesn't, then I'm super worried about their secondary. And frankly, they're just so thin as a defense too. If something happens to J.J. Watt or Chandler Jones again, or Malcolm Butler, you're going to get a whole lot of issues. So that's the story of this defense. Now, looking ahead, this is their schedule. I'm not going to go through like a record prediction or anything like that. This is just more about in the early season things to look at based on what we've talked about before. And there's one real big thing that stands out with their early season schedule. And I'm talking about the early season, by the way, because the later you go with how many injuries there are in the NFL, it's really hard to talk about meaningfully, which is why I'm not doing like a record prediction or anything like that right now. But yeah, early in the season, you see the main problem I have with the way they've approached their defense crop up immediately. In the first 6 weeks, they play, the 5 best rushing offenses in the NFL, 5 of the top 6, top 7. You catch the Titans, the Vikings, the Rams, the 49ers, and the Browns. That sucks for them. Because you're talking, like I said, even if Zane Collins ends up being pretty good, which I think there's definitely a chance of, he ain't going to start out that way as far as history dictates with a rookie linebacker, especially a guy who wasn't even in college playing like Mike inside linebacker. And they're going to get ripped apart as far as the run goes. Now, Budda Baker helps a lot with this for sure, but he's one player out of 11, and it's not like he's, a one-man show with that stuff. So that's really a huge concern with their early season schedule, is they're going to have a really vulnerable rush defense and play teams. They're going to smoke them with rushing, and that contributes to what I was talking about before, too, with their offense having – because the way you can mitigate that is if your offense stays on the field really, really consistently. But with the problems we talked about before, that's probably not going to happen. So, yeah, it's really, really tough for them. Now, there is enough talent for them to still do pretty good. And like I said, their offense is explosive enough to have some good things happen. They do catch, like the Jaguars and the Texans and stuff like that. But looking ahead, I think you're probably talking about a team without a super high ceiling because they just don't have the universal winning ways of winning that you kind of need to consistently put up W's week after week. So, yeah, I'm definitely concerned about them, especially early in the year. I think they're going to be okay, but I don't know if, are they a Super Bowl team? Absolutely not. Or can they get to double-digit wins? Maybe. It depends on the injuries they encounter along the way. But, yeah, really thin team with some talent that's going to be in a lot of close games. But I'm pretty worried about their end product. And that's the 2021 Arizona Cardinals.